should have in this environment that we operate in, like your gift acceptance policies and your dissolution clauses.
So that's interesting. I was talking with an organization recently that was brand new that had no policies whatsoever, and they were starting from the ground up trying to figure out where do we begin. And I think the 990 is a great place to really look to. You know, there are lots of different resources, and I know we'll get to those, but from the 990 perspective, what is the most important policy?
We have taken the thought that the most important policy you can have is your conflict of interest policy. And so this is mentioned on your Form 990 as a question, and you have to document how you monitor and enforce this policy, but it's also included on your Form 1023, which is your application for exempt status. And so while it's not included in the Internal Revenue Code per se, we're not sure that your application for exempt status would get approved if you were to say no to not having a conflict of interest policy. It is very important to identify any potential conflicts that can be real or perceived by people who may read your Form 990 and address them in a manner that's consistent with the policy that you have in your organization. The Form 990 requires a written narrative detailing how the organization consistently monitors and enforces this policy, and it should be done at a bare minimum on an annual basis, but you should also ensure that any conflicts that arise during the year are also addressed. And so as a baseline, monitoring should include distributing a questionnaire to your top officials, your officers, your directors, your key employees, and your highest compensated employees, what we like to call Todokis. And then you also need to know what their family members are doing, as well as any business entities that they own more than 35% of. And these transactions that you would want to identify are loans as well as business transactions, which over a specific dollar amount could require some disclosure on the Form 990 as well. And a shameless plug for New Hampshire, which is where I live and operate. The New Hampshire requires some pecuniary benefit disclosures, and their thresholds are much lower than the Form 990 and also require reporting them in the newspaper.
Well, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. But I do know other organizations outside of the tax world are, I know institutions of higher education are being required to disclose more related party activity in the footnotes themselves. So having the policy and even making the aggregation of that information easier really can be helpful to organizations as they try to maintain compliance with all these different regulations and requirements, including the newspaper. That's really interesting.
Very old school.
Old school. So Joe, what about other policies? I know organizations that have federal funding have to have procurement policies. There's lots of different things under the uniform guidance, but from your view, really just thinking from the tax direction, what other policies should organizations consider?
Well, first, let me just say thank you for reading my article on this. It's terrific to hear that article's getting some views. Appreciate that. In regards to other policies for nonprofit organizations to be aware of, one that always comes to mind for me is the gift acceptance policy. Kind of, to me, an unsung hero in the not-for-profit realm for a couple of reasons. One, it provides some parameters and guidelines for organizations to help them decide whether or not to accept a gift, just like the name says, gift acceptance policy. It can help organizations that may need to have an uncomfortable conversation, like what if that donor comes and offers you a gift of a partnership interest? Do you want that or not? Should you take that or not? A gift acceptance policy with some clear guidelines can kind of help make that yes or no decision a lot easier. We've seen the proliferation of things like cryptocurrency, for example. Do we want to accept a Bitcoin? Do we even know what a Bitcoin is or how to hold on to it? So having a gift acceptance policy really can help you with some difficult conversations while continuing to treat your potential donors with some courtesy and respect. Respectfully, we can't accept this gift because. Okay, so gift acceptance policy, I think that's a big one that you should take a look at and make sure that you're addressing all of these sort of non-traditional gifts that might come down the road to you at some point in time. Another one that I think of is the whistleblower and document retention and destruction policy. So those are two different policies there. First of all, whistleblower and document retention and destruction. Nothing really new here in the realm of either of those two policies. The one thing that the 990 makes very clear in their question is that those policies need to be written. Oftentimes we'll get a question from a client and they'll go, well, we hang on to documents for X amount of years, but that's not written down anywhere. Unfortunately, we have to answer no to those questions about, did you have this policy? Because it specifically asks if you had it in writing. In regards to whistleblower and document retention and destruction policies, there are all sorts of templates that are out there in the ether. So you can go to the IRS, offers some, lots of state nonprofit organizations, so Maine Association of Nonprofits and New Hampshire Association of Nonprofits, they offer sample policy templates for organizations to kind of borrow to adopt these policies. And the other one that is not a policy per se, but one that I want to point out here is in the realm of dissolution clauses. Unfortunately, we know all organizations at some point in time have to wrap up. And the golden rule is when a nonprofit organization dissolves, it has to disperse its remaining assets to another 501c3 entity, generally speaking. That's a general rule. Okay. What I will point out here, not to get overly technical, is that there was a revenue procedure that was in place for a really long time that said that organizations could rely on existing state laws to satisfy the dissolution requirements. So look to your state law and whatever they say, that's what you can do. More recently, the IRS issued a new revenue procedure which says you cannot do that anymore. So what I would offer is that you may want to work with your legal counsel, and you can work with legal counsel on any of these policies, by the way, but specifically in the realm of dissolution, because that's not generally a policy. It's more in your bylaws and governing documents. You might want to work with legal counsel to ensure that the wording and procedures that you have on file are in line with the current law.
That's really helpful. And whenever I hear about the gift acceptance policy, I really am a big fan of that. I had a client, I'm going to say 15 years ago, that received a $4 gift to be held in perpetuity for, a certain purpose. And I remember when we were working with the client about what to do with this $4 gift, they were really wishing they had used a gift acceptance policy to really inform their decision about taking that kind of gift, and the, help the donor understand the implication of that kind of donation. So that, also with that policy, you mentioned the crypto. That's a perfect example of gift acceptance policies that were in place 15 years ago, likely haven't considered. So how often do you think best practice would you consider reevaluating these policies?
Personally, I would say at least annually you should be looking these policies over. It doesn't mean that you need to go to legal counsel every year and incur exorbitant legal costs to revamp and recreate the wheel every single year. But I think at minimum, giving these policies a once over, especially in the conflict of interest realm, like Melissa said, I still do believe that is the biggest policy out there, because even a perceived conflict of interest can cripple an organization, honestly. So, and in the realm of talking about unusual gift stories, I'll share one that I had a few years ago. Had a nonprofit client come to me, and it was a nursing home client, elderly person passed away, and they left the organization their antique doll collection.
Of course, sure.
And the antique doll collection was valued at near $100,000 or something to that effect. And the call we got from the client was, what do we do with these dolls now? And they didn't have anything on file in terms of gift acceptance policy. And now what do we do? And so again, there is just a prime example of why having a gift acceptance policy for non-traditional gifts really can kind of help an organization one way or the other in determining what to do with these things.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, we see lots of different things, don't we? But what about any final thoughts? I think we've learned a lot today about best practices around policies in the not-for-profit tax realm. Anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
I think a good place to start for your policies is that IRS website, if you have access to the AICPA website, or your state charitable associations, like Joe said. You don't even really need to pay for memberships to be able to access a lot of these resources, and they can help you as a great starting point to get these policies in writing so that you're compliant with the 990 questions and that you have your positions documented on some of these things.
I second that. The only other thing I would offer is, especially with like the AICPA, for example, you do need to have a membership to access their material, and you do need to be able to log in. So that there might be an inherent cost with going to the AICPA, but as Melissa said, there's a ton of free sample policies that are out there for use. And as I mentioned earlier, working with legal counsel or with us on